Hello and welcome. Today, we'll be whispering about one of history's most brilliant military strategists, Hannibal Barca. So, sit back, relax, and let me take you on a journey back to ancient times when Carthage and Rome were locked in a fierce struggle for supremacy. Hannibal, the Carthaginian general, became a legend for his daring and innovative tactics, especially his bold crossing of the Alps with war elephants to surprise the Roman Empire. In this video, we will explore Hannibal's early life, his rise to military power, and the battles that cemented his place in history. From his determination to avenge his father's defeat by Rome, to his victories in the Second Punic War, and his eventual downfall, Hannibal's story is one of unmatched ambition and resilience. Now, let's begin by looking at Hannibal's early life and the world that shaped him into the great general he would become. Early life and Carthaginian heritage. Hannibal Barca was born in 247 BCE in Carthage, one of the most powerful and influential city-states of the ancient Mediterranean. Carthage, located in present-day Tunisia, had established itself as a dominant naval and commercial power, rivaling the rising Roman Republic across the sea. At the time of Hannibal's birth, the tension between Carthage and Rome was palpable, and his family was deeply entwined in the conflicts that would shape his destiny. Hannibal's father, Hannibal Barca, was a prominent Carthaginian general who had fought in the First Punic War, 264 to 241 BCE, against Rome. This war ended in defeat for Carthage, a bitter loss that forced the city to cede important territories and pay heavy war indemnities to the Romans. Hannibal, however, refused to accept Carthage's subjugation and harbored a deep resentment toward Rome. This hatred of Rome would become the foundation of Hannibal's own ambitions, and his father's influence would shape much of his early life and career. From a young age, Hannibal was exposed to the world of military strategy and leadership. His father, a skilled and determined commander, began to mentor Hannibal in the art of war almost as soon as he could walk. Hannibal saw in his son the potential to continue the fight against Rome and restore Carthage's dominance in the Mediterranean. According to historical accounts, one of the most significant moments in Hannibal's early life occurred when, at the age of 9, he swore an oath to his father. In this oath, Hannibal vowed never to be a friend to the Romans and to fight them until his last breath. This event would set the course of his life and became a defining element of his personal mission. In his early years, Hannibal accompanied his father to Iberia, modern-day Spain, where Carthage sought to establish new territories and resources following their losses to Rome. Iberia became the Barca family's stronghold, and it was here that Hannibal received his education, both military and diplomatic. The region was rich in natural resources, particularly silver, which helped to fund Carthage's military expansion. It also provided fertile ground for developing alliances with local tribes, who would later play a crucial role in Hannibal's campaigns. Hamilcar's campaigns in Iberia were not just about gaining wealth and territory, they were about building a power base from which to challenge Rome once again. Hannibal grew up watching his father lead successful military expeditions, learning firsthand the importance of both strategy and leadership. Iberia became a training ground for Hannibal, where he not only observed but also participated in military maneuvers. Under his father's guidance, Hannibal learned how to command troops, navigate difficult terrain, and forge alliances with local leaders. Hannibal's family life was also a key factor in his development. The Barca family was not just a military dynasty but also a political one. Hannibal's brothers, Hasdrubal and Mago, were also involved in Carthaginian politics and warfare, and the three brothers would later fight alongside one another in their campaigns against Rome. This familial bond was crucial, as the Barcas were united in their goal to defeat Rome and restore Carthage's power. Hamilcar's influence on his sons was profound, and they grew up with a shared sense of purpose, one that centered on vengeance against Rome. Despite his father's efforts, Hamilcar's life was cut short when he died in battle in 228 BCE, leaving Hannibal, now in his late teens, under the care of his brother-in-law, Hasdrubal the Fair, who succeeded Hamilcar as commander of Carthaginian forces in Iberia. Hasdrubal continued Hamilcar's policies of expansion and consolidation in the region, and he maintained the family's vision of challenging Roman power. During this time, Hannibal continued his military training and rose through the ranks of the army, further honing his skills as a leader. One of the key elements of Hannibal's education was diplomacy. While Carthage was a military power, it was also a trading empire, and Hannibal learned the art of negotiation and alliance building from a young age. His ability to communicate and build relationships with various Iberian tribes would later prove vital in his campaigns against Rome. Hannibal understood that to defeat a formidable enemy like Rome, he would need not only a strong army but also a network of loyal allies. In 221 BCE, Hasdrubal was assassinated, and the Carthaginian army in Iberia turned to Hannibal, now in his mid-20s, to take command. His ascension to power was swift and undisputed, as he had already proven himself a capable and charismatic leader. The soldiers in Iberia had grown to respect and admire Hannibal, both for his military prowess and for his ability to inspire loyalty. He was not just his father's son, he was a rising star in his own right, destined to lead Carthage in its fight against Rome. Hannibal's early years were marked by both personal tragedy and professional triumph. The loss of his father and later his brother-in-law solidified his resolve to fulfill the family's mission of revenge against Rome. His education in Iberia, surrounded by seasoned warriors and political leaders, gave him the tools he needed to carry out that mission. By the time he assumed full control of Carthage's forces in Iberia, Hannibal was already a seasoned commander, ready to embark on one of the most audacious military campaigns in history, the Second Punic War. Hannibal's early life was shaped by his father's hatred of Rome and the military environment in which he was raised. His oath to destroy Rome would drive every decision he made as a general, and his time in Iberia prepared him for the immense challenges he would face. The stage was set for a new chapter in the conflict between Carthage and Rome, one in which Hannibal would take center stage, changing the course of history with his daring strategies and unyielding determination. The oath to avenge Carthage. Hannibal Barca's life was shaped by a singular moment from his childhood, the famous oath he swore to his father, Hannibal Barca, to never be a friend to Rome and to seek vengeance for Carthage's defeat. This oath, taken when Hannibal was only 9 years old, became the defining element of his life and guided his every decision as a military leader. It was more than just a promise, it was a mission, one that would drive him to the heart of one of history's greatest rivalries. Hannibal's father, Hamilcar, had fought against Rome in the First Punic War, which ended in Carthage's defeat. This loss had been a deep wound for Hamilcar, who believed that Rome had wronged Carthage with unfair terms and heavy war reparations. Hamilcar's hatred for Rome was passed on to his son, and before setting off on a campaign to expand Carthage's influence in Iberia, Hamilcar made Hannibal swear eternal enmity toward the Roman Republic. This vow became Hannibal's guiding principle throughout his life. As a young boy, Hannibal traveled with his father to Iberia, where Hamilcar sought to rebuild Carthage's power base. Iberia was rich in resources, particularly silver, which was essential for funding Carthage's military efforts. It was also a region where Hannibal would gain his first military experience. He watched as his father formed alliances with local tribes and led campaigns to subdue rebellious cities. These experiences gave Hannibal an early education in both diplomacy and warfare, skills that would serve him well in the years to come. In 228 BCE, tragedy struck when Hamilcar was killed during a military campaign in Iberia. Hannibal, still in his late teens, was deeply affected by his father's death. Leadership passed to his brother-in-law, Hasdrubal the Fair, who continued Hamilcar's work in Iberia. Hasdrubal emphasized diplomacy, using marriages and treaties to strengthen Carthage's position in the region. Meanwhile, Hannibal continued to rise through the ranks of the army, gaining valuable experience and building a reputation for his military skill. In 221 BCE, Hasdrubal was assassinated, and the army turned to Hannibal to take command. At just 26 years old, Hannibal assumed leadership of the Carthaginian forces in Iberia. His appointment was met with unanimous approval, as he had already proven himself a capable and charismatic leader. His troops respected him for his bravery and his strategic mind, traits that had been honed during his years of service under his father and brother-in-law. Hannibal wasted no time in asserting his control over the region. He quickly moved to consolidate Carthage's hold on Iberia, launching campaigns to subdue tribes that had grown restless during the transition of power. His leadership was marked by boldness and determination, but always with an eye toward the larger goal, avenging Carthage's defeat at the hands of Rome. The oath he had sworn to his father was never far from his mind, and each victory in Iberia brought him one step closer to fulfilling that promise. Hannibal's early years in command were defined by his ability to blend military force with diplomacy. He understood that to challenge Rome, he would need more than just a strong army. He would need allies and resources. Hannibal worked to maintain Carthage's alliances with local Iberian tribes, ensuring that they would support his campaigns. These alliances were crucial, as the local forces would later play a key role in his plans to confront Rome. The moment Hannibal had been preparing for finally came in 219 BCE, when he laid siege to the city of Saguntum, a Roman ally in Iberia. This act was a direct challenge to Rome's authority and marked the beginning of the Second Punic War. Hannibal's decision to attack Saguntum was a calculated risk. He knew it would provoke a response from Rome, but he believed that Carthage was now strong enough to face the Romans in open conflict. The siege of Saguntum was a turning point, not just in the war but in Hannibal's life. It was the moment when the oath he had sworn as a child began to take shape in reality. By defying Rome so openly, Hannibal was signaling that he was ready to fulfill his father's legacy and carry out the vengeance that had been promised. The fall of Saguntum set the stage for the epic confrontations that would follow, as Hannibal prepared to lead his army across the Alps and into the heart of the Roman Republic. Hannibal's oath to avenge Carthage was more than just a personal vow. It was the foundation of his entire life's mission. Every decision he made as a commander was shaped by that promise, and his hatred for Rome became the driving force behind his military strategy. As we move into the next chapter of Hannibal's story, we will explore how he took his forces across the Alps and shocked the Roman world with one of the most audacious military maneuvers in history. Hannibal takes command in Iberia. In 221 BCE, after the assassination of Hasdrubal the Fair, the command of Carthage's forces in Iberia passed to Hannibal Barca, then only 26 years old. Despite his youth, Hannibal had already proven himself a capable military leader. His charisma, strategic mind, and the legacy of his father, Hannibal Barca, helped him gain the unwavering loyalty of the army. Hannibal's rise to power marked the beginning of a new chapter in Carthage's struggle against Rome, a conflict that had been simmering since the end of the First Punic War. Iberia was of immense importance to Carthage. It was not only a valuable source of wealth, particularly its rich silver mines, but also a strategic location from which Carthage could rebuild its strength and prepare for future conflicts. However, the region was far from stable. While Hasdrubal and Hamilcar had worked to establish Carthaginian control, many of the local Iberian tribes remained defiant, and Hannibal's first task as commander was to secure Carthage's position by quelling these rebellious forces. One of Hannibal's earliest military campaigns was the subjugation of the city of Helmantica, modern-day Salamanca, a key center of resistance against Carthaginian rule. The capture of Helmantica was significant not only because it removed a strategic threat, but also because it demonstrated Hannibal's ability to act swiftly and decisively. His success sent a clear message to other Iberian tribes. Carthage was the dominant power in the region, and rebellion would not be tolerated. Hannibal's approach was characterized by both force and diplomacy, as he understood the importance of maintaining alliances with those tribes loyal to Carthage. Hannibal's consolidation of power in Iberia was not just about military might. He was also a skilled diplomat, recognizing that to keep Iberia under Carthaginian control, he would need the support of the local tribes. Many of these tribes had been brought under Carthaginian influence by his father and brother-in-law, and Hannibal worked to strengthen these alliances. His ability to blend force with diplomacy helped him maintain stability in Iberia, ensuring that Carthage had a secure base of operations from which to prepare for its inevitable conflict with Rome. The relationship between Carthage and Rome was growing increasingly tense. Rome viewed Carthage's expansion in Iberia with suspicion, and Hannibal knew that conflict was on the horizon. Understanding the magnitude of what was to come, Hannibal began to prepare his forces for the inevitable war. He expanded his army, recruiting not only Carthaginian soldiers but also Iberian warriors who had pledged their loyalty to him. These warriors were known for their agility and skill in guerrilla warfare, and Hannibal believed they would be crucial in the coming battles. Hannibal's leadership during this period demonstrated his ability to combine long-term strategic thinking with immediate tactical decision-making. He didn't just see the battles in Iberia as isolated conflicts, but as part of a larger plan to challenge Rome. His army was growing stronger and more diverse, with Carthaginian infantry, Iberian skirmishers, and even more elephants, which would later become a hallmark of Hannibal's military campaigns. The turning point in Hannibal's command in Iberia came in 219 BCE, when he decided to lay siege to Saguntum, a Roman ally located south of the Ebro River. Saguntum had long been under Carthaginian influence, but its alliance with Rome made it a prime target in Hannibal's strategy to provoke a war. The siege of Saguntum was brutal and protracted, but Hannibal's forces ultimately succeeded in capturing the city. The fall of Saguntum was a direct challenge to Roman authority, and it was the spark that ignited the Second Punic War. Rome, outraged by Hannibal's attack on its ally, demanded that Carthage hand over Hannibal as punishment. When Carthage refused, the stage was set for a conflict that would become one of the most famous wars in ancient history. Hannibal's decision to attack Saguntum was bold, but it was also carefully calculated. He knew that war with Rome was inevitable, and by taking the initiative, he hoped to gain the upper hand in the conflict. With Saguntum under his control, Hannibal began preparing for his next and most audacious move, an invasion of Italy itself. His plan was to cross the Alps, bringing the war directly to Rome's doorstep. This would be a military maneuver of unprecedented boldness and one that would cement Hannibal's place in history as one of the greatest military tacticians the world has ever seen. As we move into the next phase of Hannibal's life, we will explore how he led his army through the treacherous mountain passes of the Alps and shocked the Roman Republic with his unexpected invasion of Italy. The outbreak of the Second Punic War. By 219 BCE, tensions between Carthage and Rome had reached a breaking point, and the catalyst for the Second Punic War came in the form of a siege on the city of Saguntum, a Roman ally located just south of the Ebro River in Iberia. Hannibal Barca, now firmly in command of Carthaginian forces in the region, made a bold and deliberate move to attack the city. Saguntum's alliance with Rome and its strategic location made it an ideal target in Hannibal's larger plan to provoke the Roman Republic into war. The fall of Saguntum would set the stage for one of the most famous and intense conflicts of the ancient world, a war that would pit the might of Rome against the brilliant military mind of Hannibal. The siege of Saguntum was no small feat. The city had been a prosperous and fortified settlement, with strong defensive walls and a population determined to resist the Carthaginian forces. Hannibal, however, approached the siege with his usual combination of tactical brilliance and relentless determination. The siege lasted for several months, with the Carthaginian forces slowly wearing down Saguntum's defenses. Hannibal's army, composed of Carthaginian soldiers, Iberian warriors, and war elephants, proved to be too much for the Saguntines to withstand. Despite their valiant efforts, the city eventually fell to Hannibal's forces. The fall of Saguntum was a direct challenge to Roman authority, and it was the spark that ignited the Second Punic War. Rome, outraged by Hannibal's attack on its ally, immediately demanded that Carthage hand over Hannibal to be punished for his actions. This ultimatum was delivered with a clear message: Rome would not tolerate Carthage's aggression in Iberia, and failure to comply would result in war. The Carthaginian government, however, refused Rome's demands. Hannibal had the full support of Carthage's ruling elite, and they were unwilling to sacrifice him to placate the Roman Republic. With this refusal, the lines were drawn, and both sides prepared for war. For Hannibal, this was exactly the outcome he had anticipated. The attack on Saguntum had been a carefully calculated risk, designed to provoke Rome into a conflict on terms favorable to Carthage. Hannibal knew that Rome's military strength lay in its legions, but he also knew that Rome was not prepared for a war on multiple fronts, particularly one that would reach into Italy itself. Hannibal's strategy was bold. Rather than waiting for Rome to bring the war to Carthage, he would take the fight directly to the heart of the Roman Republic. His plan was to invade Italy by crossing the treacherous Alps, a feat that had never been attempted on such a scale. The Second Punic War officially began in 218 BCE, and Hannibal wasted no time in implementing his grand strategy. His first move was to gather his forces in Iberia and prepare for the long and dangerous journey across the Alps. This was a monumental task, as Hannibal's army numbered around 40,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and a number of war elephants. The logistical challenges of such an undertaking were immense, but Hannibal's leadership and careful planning ensured that his troops were ready for the arduous journey ahead. The decision to march his army over the Alps was not just a tactical maneuver, it was a psychological masterstroke. By taking such a daring and unconventional route, Hannibal aimed to catch the Romans off guard. He knew that Rome expected a more traditional invasion, perhaps by sea or through the southern routes. The Alps, with their steep and unforgiving terrain, were seen as an insurmountable barrier, and the Romans never anticipated that Hannibal would attempt such a bold crossing. This element of surprise would prove to be one of Hannibal's greatest advantages in the early stages of the war. As Hannibal began his march towards the Alps, Rome was still reeling from the shock of the fall of Saguntum. The Roman Senate, deeply angered by Carthage's refusal to hand over Hannibal, began mobilizing its forces for what they believed would be a protracted and bloody conflict. The Roman legions, known for their discipline and organization, were sent to intercept Hannibal, but they were not yet aware of his true intentions. Rome believed that the Carthaginian forces would attempt to enter Italy through the more conventional routes, and they began preparing defenses in the south. Little did they know, Hannibal was already on his way to the Alps. The march to the Alps was grueling and perilous. Hannibal's army faced not only the harsh, mountainous terrain but also hostile tribes that inhabited the region. These tribes, many of whom had little love for either Rome or Carthage, often ambushed Hannibal's forces as they made their way through narrow passes and treacherous slopes. Despite these challenges, Hannibal's leadership remained steadfast, and his troops, inspired by his vision and determination, pressed on. The sight of war elephants navigating the steep mountain paths was both awe-inspiring. By the time Hannibal and his army emerged on the other side of the Alps, they had endured immense hardship. Many soldiers had perished in the harsh conditions, and Hannibal's once formidable force had been significantly reduced in size. However, those who survived were battle-hardened and fiercely loyal to their commander. The Romans, still unaware of the full extent of Hannibal's plan, were about to face a Carthaginian army that had overcome seemingly impossible odds to reach their homeland. Hannibal's successful crossing of the Alps was one of the most remarkable achievements in military history. It was not just a logistical feat, it was a bold statement of intent. Hannibal had proven that he was willing to defy conventional military tactics and take risks that no other commander would dare attempt. His invasion of Italy was now underway, and Rome, caught off guard and unprepared for such an audacious move, would soon find itself in the fight of its life. The crossing of the Alps. In 218 BCE, Hannibal Barca accomplished one of the most audacious and legendary feats in military history, the crossing of the Alps with a massive army, including more elephants, to invade Italy. This bold move was a defining moment in the Second Punic War, showcasing Hannibal's brilliance and determination. By choosing the treacherous Alpine route, Hannibal aimed to bypass Roman defenses and strike at the heart of the Republic, catching the Romans completely off guard. Hannibal's journey began in Iberia, modern Spain, where his army of approximately 40,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and around 40 war elephants made their way across southern Gaul. Along the way, Hannibal had to navigate complex relationships with local tribes, many of whom were hostile to the Carthaginian advance. His diplomatic skill was crucial during this phase of the journey, as he negotiated with some tribes and fought off others, ensuring his army could continue its march unimpeded toward the Alps. This combination of diplomacy and military prowess became one of Hannibal's trademarks as a leader. Upon reaching the Alps, the magnitude of the challenge became apparent. The Alps, with their towering peaks, treacherous passes, and unpredictable weather, posed an enormous obstacle for any army, let alone one carrying more elephants. The soldiers were faced with freezing temperatures, deep snow, and narrow paths that made navigation difficult and dangerous. The war elephants, a symbol of Carthaginian military power, struggled with the cold and steep terrain, and many died along the way. Nevertheless, Hannibal pressed forward, knowing that turning back was not an option. His men were tired and weary, but Hannibal's leadership and resolve inspired them to continue. One of the greatest dangers Hannibal's army faced was the threat from the Alpine tribes. These tribes, unfamiliar with the Carthaginians and wary of any foreign army passing through their territory, launched ambushes on Hannibal's forces as they made their way through the mountain passes. The narrow paths and rugged terrain gave these tribes an advantage, allowing them to attack from hidden positions and retreat quickly. Hannibal, however, proved adept at countering these attacks, using his knowledge of terrain and tactics to fend off the ambushes and keep his army moving forward. His ability to adapt to the changing conditions of the battlefield was a key factor in his success. The crossing of the Alps lasted nearly 2 weeks, and during this time, Hannibal's army suffered heavy losses. Out of the original 40,000 infantry and 12,000 cavalry, only about 20,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry survived the crossing. The war elephants, which had been intended to intimidate Roman forces, were also severely diminished, with only a handful making it through the mountains. The harsh weather, lack of food, and constant attacks from hostile tribes took a heavy toll on the army, but despite these setbacks, Hannibal's determination never wavered. By the time Hannibal's forces emerged on the other side of the Alps and descended into northern Italy, they were battle-hardened and fiercely loyal to their commander. The losses they had suffered along the way only strengthened their resolve. Hannibal's successful crossing of the Alps remains one of the most remarkable achievements in military history. It was not just a logistical triumph, but a psychological one as well. The Romans had never expected an invasion from the north, and the sudden appearance of a Carthaginian army in Italy threw them into disarray. Hannibal's strategy was clear from the start. He wanted to take the war to Rome itself. By crossing the Alps, he had bypassed the Roman defenses in the south and positioned himself for a direct assault on the heart of the Republic. This bold move gave Hannibal the element of surprise, which he would use to devastating effect in the early stages of his campaign in Italy. The psychological impact of Hannibal's presence in Italy was immense, as the Romans scrambled to respond to a threat they had not anticipated. The crossing of the Alps solidified Hannibal's reputation as one of the greatest military minds of all time. His ability to lead his troops through such harsh conditions while maintaining their morale and ensuring their loyalty was a testament to his leadership. Despite the heavy losses his army suffered during the crossing, Hannibal had achieved the impossible. He had brought a formidable army into Italy, ready to challenge Rome on its own soil. This achievement marked the beginning of a new phase in the Second Punic War. Hannibal's army, though diminished in numbers, was poised to take on the Roman legions in a series of battles that would showcase his tactical genius. The Romans, caught off guard and unprepared for such a bold invasion, would soon find themselves facing one of the most formidable opponents in their history. As we move forward, we will explore Hannibal's early victories in Italy, where he used his tactical brilliance to outmaneuver and outfight the Roman legions in battles that would leave a lasting mark on Roman military history. The Battle of Trebia. Hannibal's first major victory on Italian soil came at the Battle of Trebia in December 218 BCE, just a few months after his daring crossing of the Alps. This battle would be the first of many where Hannibal showcased his tactical brilliance, striking a devastating blow to the Roman legions and sending shockwaves throughout the Roman Republic. The Trebia River, located in northern Italy, became the setting for a confrontation that would set the tone for much of Hannibal's campaign in Italy. After crossing the Alps and descending into the Po Valley, Hannibal's forces had been significantly reduced due to the harsh conditions of the journey. Despite these losses, Hannibal wasted no time in rallying his army and preparing for his first engagement with the Roman legions. His army, now numbering around 20,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry, was battle-hardened from the treacherous journey and fiercely loyal to their commander. Hannibal knew that in order to continue his campaign, he needed to strike quickly and decisively before the Romans could fully mobilize against him. The Roman response to Hannibal's invasion was swift but underprepared. The Roman Senate had dispatched Tiberius Sempronius Longus, one of the 2 consuls for that year, to lead the Roman legions and engage Hannibal. Sempronius, eager for a quick victory, was not fully aware of Hannibal's tactical prowess or the condition of his own forces, which were not yet fully acclimated to the winter conditions in northern Italy. This overconfidence would soon prove costly for the Romans. Hannibal, ever the master of deception and psychological warfare, carefully laid a trap for the Roman forces. He understood that the Romans, under Sempronius, were eager for a direct engagement and would likely underestimate his weakened army. Hannibal devised a plan to lure the Romans into a battle on his terms, using the terrain and the harsh winter conditions to his advantage. The battlefield near the Trebia River was perfect for Hannibal's strategy. The river was cold and swollen from winter rains, and the surrounding terrain was difficult for the Roman forces to navigate. Hannibal positioned his army strategically, hiding a portion of his troops, including his brother Mago's cavalry and infantry, in an ambush position near the river. The key to Hannibal's plan was patience and timing. He needed the Romans to engage fully before springing the trap. In the early hours of the morning, Hannibal sent a small contingent of his cavalry to harass the Roman camp, provoking Sempronius into action. Eager to engage the Carthaginians and unaware of the ambush that awaited him, Sempronius ordered his legions to cross the icy waters of the Trebia River without proper preparation. The Roman soldiers, already cold and wet from the crossing, were in a weakened state by the time they reached the Carthaginian lines. Hannibal's main force, consisting of his Iberian and Libyan infantry, as well as his Numidian cavalry, engaged the Romans head-on. The battle initially seemed to be evenly matched, with both sides exchanging blows. However, Hannibal's true genius lay in what the Romans could not see: the hidden forces waiting in ambush. As the Roman legions became fully engaged, Hannibal gave the signal, and Mago's hidden troops launched a devastating surprise attack on the Roman flanks. Caught off guard, the Romans were thrown into disarray. The combination of the cold, the exhaustion from crossing the river, and the sudden assault from all sides left the Roman legions in a vulnerable position. Hannibal's cavalry, particularly his highly mobile Numidian horsemen, played a crucial role in this phase of the battle, outmaneuvering the Roman cavalry and attacking the Roman infantry from behind. The battle quickly turned into a rout. The Roman soldiers, unable to form a cohesive defense, were cut down by the Carthaginian forces. Many of them, driven by panic, attempted to flee back across the Trebia River, but the icy waters proved to be as much of an obstacle as the Carthaginian soldiers. Those who did manage to escape the battlefield were few in number, and the Roman losses were staggering. Estimates suggest that out of the 40,000 Roman troops engaged in the battle, as many as 20,000 were killed, with many more wounded or captured. Hannibal's victory at Trebia was not just a tactical success, it was a psychological blow to the Roman Republic. The Romans had underestimated Hannibal, believing that his weakened army would be an easy target after the hardships of the Alpine crossing. Instead, Hannibal had demonstrated his ability to outthink and outmaneuver the Roman legions, using the terrain and weather to his advantage. This victory sent a clear message to Rome: Hannibal was a formidable opponent, and his invasion of Italy was far from a reckless gamble. The aftermath of the Battle of Trebia had significant consequences for both sides. For Hannibal, the victories solidified his position in Italy and gave his troops a much-needed morale boost. Despite their reduced numbers, Hannibal's army had proven that it could defeat the Roman legions on their own soil. The battle also helped Hannibal secure alliances with local Italian tribes, who were impressed by his victory and saw him as a potential liberator from Roman domination. For the Romans, the defeat at Trebia was a harsh wake-up call. The Roman Senate, realizing the gravity of the situation, began to mobilize more legions and take Hannibal's threat more seriously. However, the psychological impact of the defeat lingered. The Roman soldiers, many of whom had never faced an enemy like Hannibal before, were shaken by the Carthaginian general's ability to defeat them so decisively. The Battle of Trebia was just the beginning of Hannibal's campaign in Italy. It showcased his brilliance as a tactician and his ability to manipulate the battlefield to his advantage. The victory also set the stage for further confrontations with Rome as Hannibal moved deeper into Italian territory, ready to challenge the might of the Roman Republic at every turn. As we move forward, we will explore Hannibal's next major victory at the Battle of Lake Trasimene, where he once again used his strategic genius to outwit the Roman forces and deliver another crushing defeat to the Republic. The Battle of Lake Trasimene. Following his stunning victory at the Battle of Trebia, Hannibal wasted no time in continuing his campaign in Italy. His next major success came at the Battle of Lake Trasimene in June 217 BCE, where he once again demonstrated his unparalleled tactical genius. This battle, like Trebia before it, was a masterclass in ambush and deception, leading to one of the worst defeats in Roman military history. Hannibal's ability to manipulate the terrain and exploit the weaknesses of his enemies allowed him to deliver a crushing blow to the Roman forces, leaving the Republic in shock and disarray. After the defeat at Trebia, the Roman Senate was determined to stop Hannibal's advance. The consul Gaius Flaminius, a proud and headstrong leader, was placed in charge of intercepting Hannibal. Flaminius was eager to confront Hannibal and redeem Roman honor after the humiliation at Trebia. However, his eagerness would prove to be his downfall, as Hannibal, ever the master strategist, laid a trap that Flaminius would walk straight into. Hannibal's army, though victorious at Trebia, had suffered losses and was still significantly outnumbered by the Roman forces. Hannibal knew that he could not afford a prolonged, open battle where Roman discipline and numbers could overwhelm his troops. Instead, he sought to lure the Romans into a position where he could use the landscape to his advantage, setting up a perfect ambush. The terrain around Lake Trasimene, a large lake in central Italy, provided the ideal setting for Hannibal's plan. The lake was bordered by steep hills on one side and dense forests on the other, creating a narrow pass that forced any army marching through the area into a confined space. Hannibal recognized that if he could draw the Roman forces into this narrow corridor, they would be unable to deploy their full strength, and he could attack them from multiple directions. The natural fog that often settled over the lake in the early morning hours added an extra layer of concealment, allowing Hannibal to position his forces without detection. Hannibal carefully placed his troops in the hills and forests surrounding the pass. His infantry was positioned along the slopes, hidden from view, while his cavalry, led by the highly skilled Numidian horsemen, waited on the flanks, ready to cut off any Roman retreat. The Roman army, led by Flaminius, marched unknowingly into this deadly trap, completely unaware of the danger that lay ahead. On the morning of the battle, thick fog covered the area, reducing visibility and further disorienting the Roman troops. As Flaminius and his legions marched through the narrow pass between the lake and the hills, Hannibal gave the signal to attack. His forces descended from the hills in a sudden and coordinated assault, taking the Romans completely by surprise. The confined space of the pass made it impossible for the Romans to properly organize or deploy their troops, and chaos quickly ensued. Hannibal's infantry struck the Roman legions head-on, while his cavalry circled around and attacked from the rear, cutting off any chance of escape. The Romans, trapped between the lake and Hannibal's forces, were thrown into a state of panic. The battle quickly turned into a massacre as the Carthaginian soldiers relentlessly pressed their attack. Roman soldiers who attempted to flee into the lake were either drowned or cut down by the pursuing Numidian cavalry. The ferocity of the ambush left the Roman army in complete disarray. Flaminius, who had been caught in the thick of the fighting, was killed in the initial assault. With their commander dead and no clear leadership, the Roman soldiers fought desperately but were ultimately overwhelmed. Out of the 30,000 Roman troops that had marched into the pass, it is estimated that 15,000 were killed, with many more captured or wounded. The Romans who survived the battle were scattered, and the remnants of the army were in no condition to mount a defense. Hannibal's victory at Lake Trasimene was a resounding success, not just because of the sheer number of Roman casualties, but because it demonstrated once again his ability to use terrain and surprise to devastating effect. The battle was one of the largest and most effective ambushes in military history, and it solidified Hannibal's reputation as one of the greatest tacticians the world had ever seen. His understanding of the terrain, his meticulous planning, and his ability to exploit the weaknesses of his enemies allowed him to achieve total victory with minimal losses to his own forces. The psychological impact of the defeat at Lake Trasimene was immense. Rome, already reeling from the defeat at Trebia, was now faced with the prospect of a Carthaginian army rampaging through central Italy with seemingly no one able to stop them. Hannibal's strategy was clear. He aimed to demoralize the Romans and destabilize the Republic by showing them that their legions, once thought invincible, could be defeated again and again. His hope was that by winning a series of decisive victories, he could break Roman resistance and encourage the Italian allies of Rome to defect to his side. In the aftermath of the battle, Rome was plunged into a state of panic. The Senate, recognizing the gravity of the situation, took drastic measures to secure the city's defenses. They appointed Quintus Fabius Maximus as dictator, giving him extraordinary powers to deal with the Carthaginian threat. Fabius, who would later earn the nickname the Delayer for his cautious strategy, understood that Rome could not afford another direct confrontation with Hannibal. Instead, he adopted a policy of avoiding open battle and harassing Hannibal's forces through guerrilla tactics, hoping to wear down the Carthaginians over time. Hannibal, meanwhile, continued his march through Italy, confident in his ability to outmaneuver and outfight the Romans. The victory of Lake Trasimene had given him control over much of central Italy, and his army was in high spirits, bolstered by the knowledge that they had once again defeated the mighty Roman legions. However, Hannibal knew that his ultimate goal, the defeat of Rome itself, would require even more decisive victories. The stage was now set for the next chapter in his campaign, the Battle of Cannae, where Hannibal would deliver the most crushing defeat that Rome had ever seen. The Battle of Cannae. The Battle of Cannae, fought on August 2nd, 216 BCE, remains one of the most iconic and devastating defeats in Roman military history, showcasing Hannibal Barca's unparalleled tactical genius. It was at Cannae that Hannibal used the battlefield to engineer one of the greatest encirclement maneuvers in military history, virtually annihilating a much larger Roman force. The psychological impact on Rome, as well as the military implications, were profound. In the aftermath of his victories at Trebia and Lake Trasimene, Hannibal continued to outmaneuver the Romans, moving through Italy and gaining support from discontented regions. However, Rome, determined to stop him once and for all, raised an army of unprecedented size, around 86,000 men, commanded by the consuls Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro. They hoped to overwhelm Hannibal's smaller force, which numbered around 50,000, with sheer numbers. The battle took place near the town of Cannae in southeastern Italy, a location Hannibal had deliberately chosen. The flat terrain favored his superior Numidian cavalry, and the nearby Aufidus River helped limit the Romans' ability to maneuver their larger army effectively. Hannibal knew that Varro, known for his aggressive tendencies, would likely push for a direct, overwhelming assault. Hannibal intended to use this to his advantage, turning Roman strength into weakness. On the morning of the battle, Hannibal deployed his troops in a crescent-shaped formation. At the center, he placed his weaker Gaulish and Iberian infantry, flanked by the more elite Libyan troops. His cavalry, critical to the coming encirclement, was positioned on the far wings. The Roman army, under Varro's command that day, advanced with their heavy infantry packed tightly in the center, intending to break through Hannibal's line with brute force. As the Roman legions pressed forward, Hannibal allowed his center to gradually fall back. This was a calculated move. By giving ground, Hannibal lured the Romans deeper into the trap. The Roman legions, confident in their numerical superiority, pushed forward aggressively, unaware that they were being encircled. Hannibal's flanking forces, composed of his Libyan infantry, began to close in on the Roman sides. Meanwhile, his cavalry, led by the skilled commander Hasdrubal, routed the Roman cavalry and swung around to attack the Roman infantry from behind. The encirclement was complete. The Roman army, now surrounded on all sides, was trapped with no means of escape. Hannibal's troops began a relentless assault, cutting down the tightly packed Roman soldiers who had no room to maneuver. The battle quickly turned into a massacre. The Roman legions, pressed together in the heat and confusion, were unable to organize a defense or retreat. Hannibal's men systematically slaughtered the Roman forces, and the battlefield became a scene of sheer chaos. By the end of the day, the Roman army had been virtually wiped out. An estimated 50,000 to 70,000 Roman soldiers were killed, including many of the senior commanders and one of the consuls, Lucius Aemilius Paulus. Varro, who had survived the battle, managed to flee the battlefield, but the defeat at Cannae was a complete disaster for Rome. In contrast, Hannibal's losses were minimal, around 6,000 men, including some of his most seasoned warriors. The scale of the Roman defeat was staggering, and it left the Republic in a state of shock. The psychological impact of Cannae was immense. Rome, which had long prided itself on the invincibility of its legions, now faced the harsh reality that their army had been utterly destroyed. Panic spread throughout the Roman Republic, and for a time, it seemed as though Rome itself might fall. The loss of so many soldiers, many of whom were from the most powerful families in Rome, was a devastating blow to the Roman elite. Hannibal had delivered a crushing defeat that many believed Rome could not recover from. Despite his stunning victory, Hannibal was faced with a critical challenge after Cannae. Although he had defeated the Roman legions in battle, he lacked the resources and manpower to march on the city of Rome itself. His army, though victorious, had been fighting for years and was stretched thin. Hannibal hoped that the scale of the Roman defeat would encourage Rome's Italian allies to defect to his side. Some cities in southern Italy did indeed switch allegiance, seeing Hannibal as a potential liberator from Roman domination. However, many of Rome's key allies, particularly in central Italy, remained loyal to the Republic. Rome's response to the defeat at Cannae was one of resilience. Instead of surrendering, the Roman Senate took drastic measures to rebuild their army. They levied new troops from across the Republic, including slaves and convicts, and raised more legions. Additionally, Rome appointed Quintus Fabius Maximus to lead the defense effort. Fabius had already earned the nickname the Delayer for his cautious tactics and his strategy of avoiding direct confrontation with Hannibal while harassing his forces through guerrilla warfare became the cornerstone of Rome's military response. The Fabian strategy, as it came to be known, focused on wearing down Hannibal's army over time rather than engaging in pitched battles. For Hannibal, Cannae was his greatest military triumph. It demonstrated his brilliance as a strategist, his ability to manipulate the battlefield, and his understanding of human psychology. The battle remains a classic example of how an outnumbered force can use tactical genius to achieve total victory. However, despite the magnitude of the victory, Cannae also marked a turning point in the war. Hannibal, despite his successes, was unable to capitalize fully on his victory. The war would continue, and Rome, refusing to break, would eventually adapt to Hannibal's tactics. As we continue the story of Hannibal's campaign, we will explore the long-term consequences of Cannae and how the conflict between Carthage and Rome evolved into a protracted and bitter struggle for control over the Mediterranean. Hannibal's decline in Italy. After the stunning victory at Cannae in 216 BCE, Hannibal's campaign in Italy appeared to be unstoppable. He had inflicted devastating defeats on the Roman legions, delivering blow after blow to the Roman Republic. Yet, despite his battlefield successes, Hannibal was unable to strike the decisive blow that would force Rome to surrender. Over the next several years, his fortunes began to decline as the prolonged war took a toll on both his army and his strategic position in Italy. One of the most significant challenges Hannibal faced after Cannae was his inability to capitalize on his military victories to achieve a broader strategic goal. While Cannae had been a disaster for Rome, the Roman Senate refused to negotiate or consider surrender. Instead, Rome demonstrated remarkable resilience. The Senate quickly reorganized the Roman army, raising new legions and implementing new strategies designed to counter Hannibal's strengths. Under the leadership of Quintus Fabius Maximus, Rome adopted a more cautious approach, focusing on attrition and avoiding direct confrontation with Hannibal's forces. Hannibal had counted on Rome's Italian allies defecting to his side, hoping to weaken the Republic by undermining the support it relied on to maintain its power. After Cannae, some cities in southern Italy, such as Capua, did defect to Hannibal, seeing him as a liberator from Roman dominance. However, these defections were fewer than Hannibal had anticipated, and many of Rome's most important allies in central and northern Italy remained loyal to the Republic. This loyalty severely limited Hannibal's ability to gather additional resources and reinforcements. Without widespread defections, Hannibal was forced to rely on local resources to support his army, a strategy that became increasingly difficult as the war dragged on. The Fabian strategy, implemented by Fabius Maximus, played a key role in weakening Hannibal's campaign. Instead of engaging in large, decisive battles where Hannibal's tactical genius could shine, the Romans harassed his supply lines, cut off reinforcements, and gradually wore down his forces. Hannibal's army, once a formidable force, found itself increasingly isolated. Over time, the inability to secure major victories and sustain a strong, well-supplied army began to erode the morale of his troops. Hannibal's reliance on local Italian resources became unsustainable, especially as Roman forces targeted his supply depots and blocked critical supply routes. Hannibal also struggled with maintaining his alliances with the Italian cities that had defected to his side. These cities had hoped that Hannibal's victories would lead to the rapid defeat of Rome, but as the years passed and Hannibal failed to deliver a decisive blow, many of these cities began to waver. The longer Hannibal remained in Italy without securing a final victory, the more his Italian allies began to question their loyalty. Some cities, realizing that Hannibal's presence had not brought them the liberation they had hoped for, even reconsidered their alliances and switched back to Rome's side. By 207 BCE, Hannibal's situation in Italy had become increasingly precarious. His army, though still capable of winning individual battles, had been weakened by years of fighting and constant pressure from Roman forces. Meanwhile, Rome had recovered from its earlier defeats and was now growing stronger. Under new and more effective leadership, the Romans began to take the offensive, launching counterattacks aimed at retaking lost territories and cutting off Hannibal's supply lines. The Roman legions had learned from their previous mistakes and avoided falling into the traps that had led to their earlier defeats at Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and Cannae. A significant turning point came in 207 BCE with the Battle of the Metaurus. Hannibal's brother, Hasdrubal, had been sent from Spain with reinforcements to join Hannibal's forces in Italy. However, Roman legions intercepted Hasdrubal's army before it could reach Hannibal. In a decisive engagement, Hasdrubal's forces were defeated, and Hasdrubal himself was killed. This loss shattered any hope Hannibal had of receiving reinforcements and rejuvenating his campaign in Italy. The death of Hasdrubal was a major blow to Hannibal's morale, as he realized that he was now truly isolated in Italy. With his brother's defeat and no prospect of receiving additional support from Carthage, Hannibal's campaign in Italy entered its final stages. He retreated to the southern regions of the Italian peninsula, where he managed to hold out for several more years, engaging in defensive maneuvers but unable to launch any major offensives. By this time, the war had shifted decisively in Rome's favor. The Roman legions, now better trained and more disciplined, had regained control over much of central Italy, and Hannibal's army, depleted and weakened, was no longer the formidable force it had once been. Despite Hannibal's brilliance as a tactician, his position in Italy had become untenable. The once daring general, who had marched through the Alps and brought terror to the heart of the Roman Republic, was now on the defensive. The long years of fighting, combined with the lack of reinforcements and dwindling supplies, had taken their toll. Hannibal's dream of breaking Rome's power and securing a Carthaginian victory in Italy was slipping away. In 203 BCE, Hannibal's time in Italy came to an end. He was recalled to Carthage to defend his homeland from a Roman invasion led by Scipio Africanus, one of Rome's most brilliant military commanders. Hannibal's withdrawal from Italy marked the conclusion of one of the most remarkable military campaigns in history. While he had come close to defeating Rome, his inability to secure a final, decisive victory meant that his efforts in Italy ultimately failed to bring down the Roman Republic. As we move to the final chapter of Hannibal's life, we will explore his return to Carthage, his final battle at Zama, and the events leading to his exile and death, which marked the end of one of the greatest military careers in ancient history. Exile and death of Hannibal. After spending over a decade fighting in Italy, Hannibal's time as a military commander was nearing its end. In 203 BCE, Hannibal was recalled from Italy to defend Carthage against the advancing Roman forces led by Scipio Africanus, one of Rome's most brilliant military minds. This marked the beginning of the final chapter of Hannibal's life. Despite his earlier successes, the war had turned decisively in Rome's favor, and Hannibal would face his greatest challenge yet, defending Carthage on his own soil. The final showdown between Hannibal and Scipio took place at the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE, near Carthage in present-day Tunisia. By this time, the Carthaginian Senate, weakened by years of war and internal divisions, had entrusted Hannibal with leading their forces in a desperate attempt to fend off the Roman invasion. The stakes were higher than ever. If Hannibal could defeat Scipio at Zama, he might yet save Carthage from destruction. However, the odds were stacked against him. Hannibal's army at Zama was composed largely of hastily assembled troops, many of whom were not battle-hardened veterans. In contrast, Scipio's Roman legions were well-trained, disciplined, and supported by Numidian cavalry under the command of Massinissa, a former Carthaginian ally who had defected to Rome. Hannibal's forces were also outnumbered, and unlike previous battles, he could not rely on the element of surprise or superior tactics to overcome these disadvantages. The Battle of Zama began with Hannibal deploying his war elephants in an attempt to disrupt the Roman lines, as he had done successfully in past battles. However, Scipio was prepared for this tactic. The Roman legions opened their ranks, allowing the elephants to pass harmlessly through, and the Roman cavalry, aided by the Numidians, swiftly neutralized the elephant threat. With his elephants neutralized, Hannibal's infantry advanced, but they were met by the disciplined Roman legions, who held their ground in the face of the Carthaginian assault. The battle quickly turned against Hannibal. His infantry, though numerous, could not break through the Roman lines, and the superior Roman cavalry overwhelmed Hannibal's own horsemen. As the battle progressed, Scipio's forces executed a well-coordinated attack, surrounding Hannibal's troops and cutting them down. Despite his best efforts, Hannibal's army was decisively defeated at Zama. The once great general, who had come so close to destroying Rome, now faced the harsh reality of defeat on his own homeland. The defeat at Zama marked the end of the Second Punic War. Carthage, now militarily and economically devastated, was forced to sue for peace. The terms of the peace treaty were harsh. Carthage had to disband most of its military forces, pay a massive war indemnity to Rome, and relinquish control over its territories outside Africa. While Carthage was not immediately destroyed, it was reduced to a client state of Rome, with no real ability to challenge Roman dominance in the Mediterranean. Following the defeat at Zama, Hannibal's political career in Carthage began to unravel. Despite his defeat, Hannibal remained a popular figure among the Carthaginian people, who saw him as a hero for his earlier victories against Rome. However, his enemies in the Carthaginian Senate, many of whom had long opposed him, saw the opportunity to diminish his influence. Hannibal was appointed Safit, a political office similar to a magistrate, where he implemented economic reforms and worked to pay off Carthage's war indemnities. His political success, however, made him powerful enemies, both in Carthage and in Rome. Rome, wary of Hannibal's continued influence, pressured Carthage to remove him from power. Fearing that his political enemies in Carthage might hand him over to the Romans, Hannibal fled the city in 195 BCE and went into exile. For the next several years, Hannibal traveled across the eastern Mediterranean, seeking refuge with various rulers who were either hostile to Rome or eager to use Hannibal's military expertise to their advantage. He first sought refuge in the court of Antiochus III, the king of the Seleucid Empire, who was preparing for war against Rome. Hannibal's time in the Seleucid court was marked by his efforts to advise Antiochus on how to defeat the Romans. However, Antiochus, though initially welcoming, did not fully trust Hannibal and chose not to give him a significant role in the war effort. In 190 BCE, the Battle of Magnesia ended in a decisive Roman victory over Antiochus, and with it, Hannibal's hopes of using the Seleucid Empire to strike back at Rome were dashed. Following Antiochus's defeat, Hannibal was once again forced into exile. He traveled to Crete, where he lived for a short time, before eventually seeking refuge with Prusias I, the king of Bithynia, a small kingdom in northern Anatolia. By this time, Hannibal was an aging man, still a brilliant strategist but with few allies and little hope of ever reclaiming his former glory. In Bithynia, he helped Prusias in a local conflict against Eumenes II of Pergamon, a Roman ally. Despite some successes in these smaller-scale conflicts, Hannibal knew that his days of grand military campaigns were behind him. In 183 BCE, Rome, still wary of Hannibal's presence, demanded that Prusias hand him over. Realizing that his capture was imminent, Hannibal chose to take his own life rather than be paraded through Rome as a war trophy. According to legend, Hannibal took poison that he had carried with him for years, stating, "Let us relieve the Romans of their fear of an old man." Hannibal's death marked the end of one of the greatest military careers in history. Though ultimately defeated, Hannibal's impact on warfare and strategy endured for centuries. His campaigns, particularly his crossing of the Alps and the victories at Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and Cannae, are still studied as examples of tactical brilliance. Hannibal's ability to outmaneuver and outthink his opponents made him one of the most respected and feared generals of his time. Even in defeat, Hannibal's legacy as one of history's greatest military minds remains intact. His struggle against Rome, though unsuccessful in the end, left an indelible mark on the Roman Republic and shaped the course of Mediterranean history for generations to come. In this video, we delved into the life and campaigns of Hannibal Barca, one of the greatest military strategists in history. We explored his early victories, including his daring crossing of the Alps and the devastating defeats he inflicted on Rome at Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and Cannae. Despite these successes, we also followed his eventual decline in Italy, his final confrontation with Rome at the Battle of Zama, and his years in exile. Hannibal's story is one of brilliance, perseverance, and ultimately, the resilience of the Roman Republic that survived his relentless campaigns. If you enjoyed learning about Hannibal and his extraordinary life, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to hit the notification bell so you'll be the first to know when new content is released. Thank you for watching, and stay curious.